Hi guys, it's Phil
And Liam
from Die Hard on a Black, and we're excited to talk to you about a brand new podcast we're launching called 48 Hours of Buddy Movies.
That's right, folks. 48-hour-long
approximately
episodes exploring 48 different buddy movies, beginning with the original classic that started it all, Walter Hill's 1982 masterpiece, 48 Hours, starring Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy.
And just like Die Hard on a Blank, our new show will explore the influence of 48 Hours on the action genre, one buddy movie at a time.
We'll be covering iconic franchises such as the Beverly Hills Cop movies, the Stakeout movies, the Bad Boys movies, classics of the genre like Running Scared,
Hyams Hive Rise Up,
Midnight Run, Red Heat, Tango and Cash, The Hard Way,
plus tough thrillers such as To Live and Die in LA, Black Rain, Point Break, Training Day, and The Way of the Gun.
As well as a few wild cards that you might not expect, such as RoboCop, Alien Nation, and, of course, Phil's favorite,
Harley Davidson and the Marlboro Man.
So if you're a fan of two buddies talking buddy movies,
then 48 Hours of Buddy Movies is for you.
Visit patreon.com/48 Hours of Buddy Movies to subscribe for the price of 1 cup of coffee a month.
See you in the squad car.
Or walking to the squad car, mildly irritated that we've been paired off.
Wherever. That's patreon.com/48 Hours of Buddy Movies to subscribe. Welcome to Die Hard on a Blank, the podcast where we explore the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. I'm Philip Gawthorne, and with me as always is Liam Billingham, and today's film is Hard Rain.
It's Die Hard in a flood.
And because of the Graham Yost connection, we are bringing back Kris Tapley for a three-peat. Welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
Hi, Kris.
Am I the first to do 3?
You are the first to do
What a loser.
3. We just need to have you back. We need you.
Here I am.
Well, Kris is the, as I'm sure you know by now, is the maestro behind 50 Mile Per Hour, the Speed Oral History podcast, 50-episode deep dive on the entire history of that film that has reinvigorated it in the cultural minds of all. A fantastic show, and this is a speed adjacent movie, I would say, which is one of the reasons we want to have you back for this. And I want to start by asking you this. Came across this really interesting piece of trivia, and we've talked about this a little bit in our previous episodes with you when we covered the original Speed and its excellent sequel, Cruise Control.
How's your voice?
Enough,
a movie I really like.
Enough.
JK. According to, can you debunk or confirm this internet rumor that I found? According to the writer Graham Yost, producer Mark Gordon and he briefly considered this film, Hard Rain, as a potential sequel to Speed. The studio wasn't interested in a story so disconnected from the first film. They decided to move on and replaced Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock with Christian Slater and Minnie Driver playing new characters. Is that complete bullshit? Is there any truth to that? Is there a sliver?
I've never heard that. Graham, I feel like Graham would have brought that up because we did just talk in terms of how Speed allowed him to set up the flood, which is what Hard Rain was originally called,
right.
Easier because Broken Arrow had already been in kind of process by the time Speed came out. But the success of Speed allowed them to get Hard Rain up and running at Paramount. So we're not really sure. It could be, may or may not be true. Maybe it was one of those things where there was just an appetite for it. He had this script, it was considered, but then they decided to make it its own thing.
This does sort of support my theory that that Speed, instead of making Speed 2, they should have just made Speed an anthology series where every installment is like a different characters or something like that. Like, now this doesn't have the moving vehicle quality really, but it would have been interesting if this was a Speed. No, I take it back. It wouldn't have worked.
It's a terrible idea. Let's move on. Kris, what's your history with this movie?
I was also going to say, I just kind of doubt that too, because Paramount would have owned this script, so there would have been no way to do that. But my history with this movie,
Speed Studio, wasn't it? At one point.
My history with this movie is all of a month old.
Really?
I saw this movie for this. It's the reason I did this episode was so I could finally watch Hard Rain.
I am
and
shocked.
Also the Graham connection was fun. But yeah, I remember when Hard Rain came out. What was it, January or something of 98? Am I right about that?
That is correct. Yep. January 16th.
Yeah, so here's the thing about that. I remember kind of being put off by it in the trailer because I didn't want to see Morgan Freeman playing this bad guy that he was apparently going to be playing. I was like, I'm not into that. And I wasn't like a, Christian Slater super fan or anything. So I just had no real interest. And this was, the 90s. I've said this before. I saw everything a year late when basically the night it would premiere on HBO. That's how I saw movies in the 90s for the most part. I didn't see a ton of movies in the theater every year. And so this just wasn't one that I got around to. And by the time 98 rolls around, you get to 99 and HBO's premiere of it. I'm a senior in high school preparing to go off to film school. I wasn't into these movies really anymore at that point. So it just kind of landed in a weird spot. If it came out in 96, I probably would have seen it a bunch of times on VHS or something, right? But I think it's just by virtue of when it came, I just never got around to it until recently for this episode.
So you're coming to it pretty objective. Was that true for you as well, Liam?
I remember the trailer. The trailer for this movie was like a big rainstorm, and it felt like it was going to be a more serious movie than it was. I remember finding the trailer compelling, and then I never saw the movie until 2 nights ago when I watched it for this episode. So I'm in the exact same boat as Kris. How about you, Phil?
I saw it on video, and it was one of those things. Some of these movies, like Turbulence, I saw, was kind of disappointed, thought that's a 2-star movie. Came back to it for this and loved it. But this was one of those things where I was like, yeah, how I felt about it when I watched it on video was exactly the same as how I felt about it now. It's kind of a pretty middling, movie. There's some great stuff in it. There's some interesting stuff to discuss.
There are fans though, right? Like
it's
one
kind
of
of
our
popular.
listeners,
Yeah,
Dave, is obsessed with this movie.
It's kind of popular.
He loves it. He's like, he watches it. Yeah, I think people like it. I think it's like a comfort movie.
Yeah,
for a certain type of like TBS
late
watching
90s
fan.
time capsule. It's just like,
I will say, I think it's a beautiful looking movie, and I can't imagine what a nightmare it was to make. Because of the amount of
all I could
goddamn
think about
time.
was how miserable this must have been to shoot.
Yeah, just like a nightmare.
Ugh.
I mean, dude, your skin at the end of every single
Aye,
day,
aye,
like
aye.
that. Oh,
There's this line from Graham in one of my episodes where he talks about how when he first met Morgan Freeman, he walked up and he said, "Morgan, hi, I'm Graham Yost. I wrote Hard Rain." And Morgan just looked at him and goes, 88 days underwater.
Yeah.
That's so
absolutely.
funny.
Well, yes, you just mentioned this, so let's go straight into our fast facts, because Hard Rain was released in the US by Paramount on January 16th, 1998, approximately 2 months after our last film, The Jackal, which was November 14th of the previous year, 9.5 years after Die Hard now. Directed by Mikhail Solomon, written by the aforementioned Graham Yost, produced by Ian Bryce, Gary Levinson, and Mark Gordon, who also produced Speed, which Yost also wrote. It, of course, stars Morgan Freeman, Christian Slater, Randy Quaid, and Minnie Driver. And on an estimated budget of approximately $70 million, it grossed just $19.9 million at the box office, but later gained significant international popularity on home video. So yeah, there's a relatively small, I think, cult following for this film. But it's I don't know, it sort of feels like it's at the fringes.
I feel like all of our energy right now matches this movie a little bit. It's like,
Don't worry, stay with us, stay tuned.
We've
Don't
spent
go
some
away.
energy talking about something
I've written
else,
the
and now
outline,
we're
like-
a little,
Yeah.
Let's get it back, baby.
That's why I'm guzzling a high energy drink
honestly,
right now. I'm not going to name it, but
The first 45 minutes I actually really had fun with. I will say that. Like, it's essentially Judgment Night with water skis, but
love that.
That's so good. It really is.
Judgment Night with
Well,
jet skis, I should say.
I wonder, it's Judgment Night with jet
Judgment
skis.
Night on a blank.
But I also
Spin off.
well, oh God, I don't know if this is going to come up later. Maybe it is. But should we talk about the woo of it all, Phil, or do you want to save that?
Go for it. I think it's relevant.
He was gonna do
You told me that John Woo was going to direct this movie, and you can see it. You can see it sprinkled, the double guns, right? But it feels like a B- version of that, right? I think that, like, this is a beautifully shot movie. Mikhail Solomon has shot some amazing looking movies. But it's like it doesn't have that kind of like visceral energy. The sequence with the jet skis in the high school, I think, is the high water mark, so to speak, of this movie. And that's the thing that it feels the most woo-esque, whatever you want to call it.
One sequence I remember from seeing it.
I had a really great film school professor who once we were talking about directing in one of those ways you do in film school, and he was Italian. I won't do the accent, but he would always say that like everyone on a film set is doing their job and the director's doing the movie. And I think like this movie is beautiful to look at, but like there's like a little bit of a pulse missing. There's something missing from the forward momentum of this that a motor that might be maybe a directorial problem and maybe a screenplay problem, but it's like has shades.
There's a major. I can actually believe I can zero in on specifically.
Diagnose?
Yes, I believe I can diagnose exactly what the problem is from in my humble opinion when we get to Anatomy of an Action movie. But let's move into our next section where we explain just why the heck we're discussing this movie on this show, which isn't Judgment Night on a blank, but is Die Hard on a blank. We're going to move into our next section of the show.
Die Hard DNA. Phil,
I'm all over the shop. I'm all over the shop. Okay, the DP of this film, Peter Menzies Jr., also shot. Do any of you guys know?
Die Hard 2?
Die Hard with a Vengeance.
Ah,
interestingly,
good-looking movie.
It's a classic Die Hard on a blank premise. Bad guys take over a blank, up to one ordinary guy to fight back. The hero has one key ally to help them. Karen, played by Minnie Driver, fulfills the Al Powell role in that respect. The plot revolves around a heist. Bad guys motivated purely by money as opposed to any kind of political ideology.
We just want the money.
That was really good.
Yeah, that was really good.
That was really good. I don't know how you did that. The villain / thief is the protagonist, much like Gruber in Die Hard. He's the one driving the action forward, at least for the first half of the movie. Again, and we see this a lot. It was something I think quite interesting when we think back about how we feel about these issues now. But law enforcement in this movie, as they are in Die Hard, are either ineffective, corrupt, or straight up psychotic. You know, and similarly in Die Hard, you have that spectrum from the low-key ineptitude of Dwayne T. Robinson to the more grandiose psychosis of Special Agent Johnson. But this film, again, runs that gamut. Almost all the cops are various gradations of awful. The film has its origins in the disaster movie genre. As Kris mentioned, it was originally even entitled The Flood. Die Hard, of course, connects to Towering Inferno. This film is literally involving a disaster. And the other thing that I think, and this will be quite interesting to unpack when we get to our section about the premise, both films, Die Hard and Hard Rain, have strong Western echoes. You know, Die Hard repeatedly references Westerns. Gruber obviously calls McClane a cowboy and various, Roy Rogers and all of that. This is essentially Gary Cooper, right? This is essentially a modern Western, so I think that's kind of an interesting lens through which to look at this.
Graham has talked about it in those terms too.
Yeah,
I mean, Morgan Freeman's literally wearing a black hat,
right?
So.
Right, and
that's true.
The sheriff of a small town and all of that kind of stuff. But
and Slater's kind of like the guy who comes to the town and cleans it up, right? Like that's kind of part of it too. Is he's like kind of shows up and sees the corruption and sort of has to deal with it, right?
Or
that's
maybe
kind of
just that guy, like, is it High Noon, or the guy that everybody kind of underestimates, that's just considered a bit of an irrelevance that has to kind of step up, So let's dig into that in a bit more detail though after this quick break. And we're back with our next section of the show, Anatomy of an Action movie, where we explore the tenets, we live in a Twilight world, yada, yada, yada.
What the fuck,
Let's go!
That's the way you handle that.
This is my bit. Oh, man, this is a weird episode. All right, keep going.
The premise of this movie is as follows. As the small midwestern town of Huntingberg, Indiana, is overwhelmed by an epic flood, armored car security guard Tom, Christian Slater, finds himself in the middle of a heist plot orchestrated by determined thief Jim, played by Morgan Freeman. Tom attempts to thwart the thieves by hiding the money, but as the water level rises, he soon discovers that the opportunity presented by this natural disaster brings out both the best and the worst in his fellow citizens. And the ticking clock is, can Tom stop the thieves, avenge his partner's death, and save the remaining citizens before the dam breaks and the entire town goes completely underwater? So, yeah, pretty good. I mean, I think that's a pretty cool premise. But we haven't actually asked you really quick, like, where do you land on it? What did you like this movie? What are your feelings about it? Just off the top.
I like the first 45 minutes. I think it's a classic movie that runs out of steam. You know, I didn't quite love the concept of hiding the money. It just seems like, I guess passive is the word. It's just, it's not interesting.
This kind of brings me to the diagnostic theory I have as to why that is the case. Because when you,
what I love about the movie, and we'll talk about it, is a lot of the craft involved in the first 45 minutes.
Yes.
I mean, keep in mind, Mikhail Solomon shot The Abyss, and I think that made him the only guy probably who could make this movie, given the amount of water and just what's going on in some of those sequences.
Pruned? Like, yeah, he's really. Just like, I'm cold.
Talk about pruned. A miserable shoot. I mean, between that and this, well,
they called it The Abuse.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, but this does get to the point that I think why this doesn't work as well as Yost's other high concept scripts, Speed and Broken Arrow, right? Like,
well, that's assuming Broken Arrow works.
Whoa.
Just saying, my friend.
I'm trying to get the energy back, baby.
Yes. Well, I was, in my opinion, I mean, look, we've done a whole episode about Broken Arrow. I know you're not the world's biggest John Woo fan. Okay, I am. And I think Broken Arrow is amazing. And obviously, I think we can all agree that Speed is amazing. But the difference, I think, with this concept is that, like, okay, it's about some thieves stealing some money from an armored car. Just let them take it. Who gives a fuck? In Speed, there's a bomb on a bus that's going to kill a bunch of ordinary citizens and potentially a bunch of other people. In Broken Arrow, there is a nuclear weapon that is loose and is going to, and they actually detonate it halfway through the movie. You know, it's bold. This movie is kind of like, gives a shit. Just let them take it. So I actually feel the inverse of how you feel about it, Kris. I actually feel the movie, I was less interested in the first half and more interested in the second half when, again, there is going to be a spoiler in this episode because there is a significant plot twist.
For 1998 Hard Rain.
In addition to the fact that I think that concept is just like the rooting interest, the stakes aren't that high. It also has none of the visual pizzazz that Speed has, that Broken Arrow has. They're set in bright sunshine. This is all gloomy and dark. I'm not saying it's not well shot, but just it's less visually arresting as well. So I think you have the two things together makes it just for a less intoxicating stew.
Can I add to your point,
Please.
Phil? And I think that actually this is Chris's third episode. We love having him on. And something that always comes up because we've talked about Speed and Speed 2 is like, what's the device? What's the thing that's propelling the action forward, right? In Speed, it's a bus. It makes total sense. In Speed 2, it's a boat. And like, it goes 10 knots. You could literally, as you say in your episode about it, like you could jump off the boat and jump off, to quote Petey Gawthorne. You could jump off and you'd be great. But
you're actually quoting Graham by saying that.
I am. That's right. That's right. That's what it is. But in Hard Rain, like the literal fact that everything is waterlogged and moving slowly, like it feels like that's part of the movie too, right? It's why the jet ski sequence works for me, because like there's something cutting through the water. Yeah. And a lot of the time in this, I'm just kind of like, we're stuck like in an apartment that's underwater. We're stuck in a jail cell that's underwater. Like it
that's
never
very true,
it can't propel itself forward too much because
that's why
water
I like the first half. Yeah, it's the chase sea kind of stuff. And just, I've never seen a jet ski pursuit through a flooded, school.
Yeah, that
was kind of interesting.
That bit was memorable. It's weird that
when he does the thing with the snorkel, like Dead Calm vibes,
yeah,
where he turns the flashlight into a snorkel.
That was a cool sequence.
It's kind of cool.
I did like that. Yeah. It's weird that I just coincidentally watched 3 movies that all are Die Hard on a jet ski, which is Speed 2, this, and Deep Rising. So there was something in the air in that 97, 98
something
thing
in
about,
the water, actually. Hey! Oh my
Get the air horn
God.
out. Let's talk about the Western thing.
Just trying to keep the energy up, guys.
I've consumed so much caffeine. It's like potentially quite dangerous. Let's talk about the Western thing, because as you said, Kris, Graham framed it in those terms and saw it in those terms. I think that's quite an interesting thing to unpack about this movie. Is actually if you go through the looking glass, it really does feel like a Western. I think that makes it kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. The fact that it's a Brinks truck or whatever, it's kind of like Pinkerton's rendered in the modern context.
That's a good point.
Sort of,
yeah,
moving bank heist thing. That's kind of cool. And it's the town, it's the setting, everybody knowing each other. Like this guy who like mans the flood situation or whatever's going on with
Wayne
him.
Duvall character, right? In the dam.
He's kind of like a classic Watchmen type up there. We're doing what he does. There's a lot of cool stuff like that in it, and I really like when Westerns are kind of rendered in a modern context.
Same,
me too.
To me, I'm a huge Westerns fan. I own, God, hundreds. It's just my thing. I wrote my thesis on Westerns in grad school, so that is my jam. And you can apply those principles all over the place.
Are there any, being a Western scholar, are there any Westerns that this particularly like invokes or for you that feels like it's cut from the same cloth? Because we had an interesting
Nothing
conversation.
Specific. It really
about
just seems
Stagecoach
broadly
and Con Air, for example. And the connections between
all the characters.
In a moving setting.
Nothing specifically. I think just broadly, there's so many archetypes present that it recalls just different strands. It recalls a little bit of High Noon.
Yeah.
Not that there's a bank robbery situation there, but it just has that kind of feeling.
Yeah.
I do think that one way that it does kind of thematically is that one thing I think that your point about the money is well observed. Like, who cares, right? Like, it's just some money. And even Ed Asner has this line where he's like, you're sticking your neck out for somebody else's money, which feels like a very Western thing. Like, the fact that one thing I like about this movie is that Morgan Freeman isn't like, I'm going to go move to like the islands and like drink, like nice frozen margaritas. Like, he's like, this is my retirement fund, right? It's him. It's a laid off school teacher. It's like these guys who are kind of all fuck ups who just need the money because they have no other way out. And it has that little bit of like, you're on your own here kind of thing, which feels like a very Western frontier. We're outside of like normal civilized society. Everything's falling apart around us. And like, we just need this money to live. Right. And Freeman is 60 when he makes this movie. Right. And that is an unusual thing in an action movie for the hero to be like a 60-year-old guy who just like needs to retire. If there's something I like about it, it's that. And I honestly think like you're kind of sympathetic to him because it's Freeman. I think he's a little miscast as the villain, but he's well cast as the unexpected hero of the movie.
Yeah, you had a point about this you mentioned when we just off mic that I thought was really interesting about the working class politics of this movie, like that was actually quite an interesting reading because all of the characters, there's a sense of like this town is economically depressed. The director isn't as interested in that, I don't think. I think he's more interested in style and spectacle and it being an action picture. But actually, maybe there's another director could have dialed in more to that stuff. It's really interesting to think about what this could have been in another director's hands.
I think this could have been an
interesting
Coen Brothers movie, right? I feel like if the Coen Brothers had taken this and rewritten it, it could have been like a really fat, or like it evokes Sam Raimi's A Simple Plan for me a little bit. These kind of like economically depressed, desperate people who like have no other opportunity. And if it leaned into that, it could have been a little more interesting. I think like I like the second half of this movie better because I'll be honest, and maybe I'm a dunce, I had no idea that Randy Quaid was going to take a heel turn. I had no idea. It surprised me. And I thought that moment worked pretty well. So I was sort of into what like is kind of there, but the movie doesn't go very deep on, which is kind of like, how do we survive in these situations, right? Like this town no one's moving back here except maybe Betty White and her beleaguered husband, but like everyone's going to move on from here. And I like the idea they're like, I just need this money and I'm out. I'm going to disappear. And like, one thing that the movie tries to do is Slater's like, look, if I tell them where the money is, they're going to kill me. And that's like strong. That's like
that was a good motivation, I thought. But
yeah, I sort of agree that like it feels, to your point, Kris, like an afterthought.
Yeah, and here's a reference. I would like to see somebody like, if he would be interested in making a movie with this many moving parts, Jeremy Saulnier. Rebel Ridge is a good example of a quasi-Western vibe in a modern context, and that movie rules.
It rules. It's so awesome. Good. I watched it last night, or when it comes out later, but we were talking about it earlier. It's such a Western.
You've seen all of his stuff, right?
Yeah.
Or have you?
Yeah.
I mean,
huge
Blue
fan.
Ruin and Green Room are like, God, Jesus.
We're doing
man.
Green Room on the show.
If I said anything about Rebel Ridge, I know we're segueing now, but I would say tighten it up like Blue Ruin and Green Room. Those movies are an hour 40 minutes, and it's like, I love it when a movie sings at that length.
I also
totally
think what
agree.
Saulnier is brilliant at that could have been that maybe would have been really interesting for a movie like this, and it's not necessarily the first thing you think about with him, but it's something we've talked about a lot on the show that is in danger of becoming the lost art, which is that really, really strong sense of place. They feel like a very, very specific milieu. And I love that in cinema, and because often stuff feels just so vague and vanilla and sort of sanded off. So I love it when a film feels like it's set in a really specific place. And a movie that we talked about that was like this, that this could have been maybe is a very high bar. Place Beyond the Pines, for example. Like really, really specific. To a certain area, a certain part of the country, and the sensibilities. This film just doesn't feel like that. It doesn't feel like this feels like it could have been set anywhere between. Well, the coasts to some extent.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that like why not talk about Rebel Ridge? But like one of the things that's interesting is that this is made in the post-Speed era, right? Where it's like momentum and forward momentum and movement. And Rebel Ridge is like, I've heard Saulnier himself described it as First Blood meets Michael Crichton. So, because it has these long, really good expositional scenes where people are talking about what's going on. Steve Zissou has that great scene outside the church where he's like, I can't tell you, but if you ask questions, maybe you're not asking the right questions that feel very like people not actually talking about what's going on. And like, what's interesting about Rebel Ridge is that it feels like, in the best way, it's like someone who's listened to a lot of true crime podcasts wanted to make a grungy action movie version of that. It's like
when
nice
I was
fusion.
watching that, I was like, my God, the research this man did.
Oh my God.
Like, just you could just see the research pouring out onto the page that he had to like, because, there's a lot of just stuff about red tape and stuff in there that is just like incredible. And to turn that into such a dramatic propulsive machine was so,
and a smart one.
Awesome movie.
It's almost as much a political thriller in like a small town politics way. And Hard Rain could have been that. Well, but it's made it a different time.
The other thing, you just referenced the scene outside the church, which brings me to the other point I wanted to mention. I think in another director's hands, this could have lent more into the biblical apocalyptic feel that I think at times it's trying to evoke. Obviously, a flood, a biblical event. There's a whole thing about the church being restored. At one point, someone gets hit by a Jesus statue. We talked about Daylight really went deep on this stuff, and it's on the periphery here. But it's just interesting when you like it. So in Yost's, not that he needs defending, but like there's a lot of really interesting ingredients here. I just think some of them are undercooked, which brings us to our next section of the show.
Or maybe they're underwater.
Yes, I'm gonna get my air horn out for the punometer here. Need to have it handy.
Do you actually have an?
Yeah, it doesn't work though. That happened last time.
This is great podcasting. Is you opening an app?
The pun.
Thank you.
The hero of this movie is Christian Slater as Tom. Doesn't even fucking have a surname. Tom. I love Christian Slater in so many things. Like True Romance is a top 3 movie for me. I could go on all day. You guys all know the credits, right? He is generally very alive.
Gleaming the Cube.
Gleaming the Cube.
Name of the Rose.
Heathers. And Very Bad Things. Many, many, many more. Like always a very electric actor at his best. It's certainly something like True Romance or Heathers, right? In this, though, although I think he's very funny and charming, just kind of a bland, boring character. And, a movie that I thought about with this in terms of his like character, one of the things I love the thing, and you dialed in on this, Liam, was that he was like an ex-construction salesman or something like that. Was like
he had
his
a construction.
backstory,
He
right?
was selling construction.
Okay, kind of interesting. Again, for the whole economically depressed, like people struggling to stay afloat. No pun intended. But think of a movie.
Get the air horn.
Oh yeah, I can't be bothered.
Out,
Fuck it. You have to just do your own, make it even more cringe. But Black Rain, for example. One of the things I love about that movie, the Ridley Scott movie with Michael Douglas, right?
Movie.
It's a fantastic movie. One of the most underrated, stylish thrillers of the late 80s. In that movie, one of the things I love about it the most is the character's motivation is so strong. He is he's a New York cop who is under investigation for corruption in New York, loses the prisoner that he's supposed to be transporting in Japan, and therefore knows that people, if I don't catch this guy, it's going to look like I took a payoff. So I was thinking that his motivation is so strong. In this movie, the motivation is incredibly weak. But I thought, if you had a backstory that was like, say Christian Slater, for example, used to be a cop, was accused of taking a payoff, didn't, but got bombed out. And then something like this happens, and he had the feeling like, this is my redemption. This is because I get people will think that I was in on it. It's something. I'm not saying that's like pretty much off the top of my head, right? But you know what I mean? It just doesn't feel like he has a particularly strong motive beyond being basically decent to do anything. And I think that's just a weakness of the film. I would have loved to see, just to give this more a bit more pizzazz, someone like Sam Rockwell in this part, because there's also a version of this that's like the Coens that isn't necessarily Sam Rockwell could do either. He could do the Three Billboards version of it, or he could do the slightly absurdist comedy version of this. I think of those like a Coen Brothers, more like the more comedic tone of something like this.
Yeah, I'd like to see John Turturro in this role.
Sure, I mean that would be.
I'm literally kidding.
I mean, I could see a version of it that would be very serious, like that. Yeah. But what are your thoughts on this? On him as Christian Slater as Tom?
You want to go, Liam?
I'll go. I think that Christian Slater is interesting because he's always the odd man out. Like, he's always kind of the, like, looking around, not quite sure he fits in. Or he's the incredibly confident guy who knows what he's doing, like a la Cuffs, right? But he's always sort of like he's a big nerd in True Romance, bringing girls to see Sonny Chiba movies. And the only reason it works out is because he meets Alabama, right? So it's like, and Broken Arrow is a great example of this. He has that great character moment at the beginning where he's like looking at himself in the mirror and he's like, what am I doing? And I just feel like, to your point, like the idea that he's like, I need to get out of this town or I need to get out of this business is such like an underexplored. He has no character arc. He doesn't change really over the course of the movie. And also, I think, to be honest, I love Minnie Driver. They have no chemistry. They have zero chemistry. I found it like negative chemistry almost. They both seem to just kind of like be in this part.
She's useless.
The character
is useless.
Yeah, I totally agree.
It's there to save him in that one moment and to doubt him earlier moments.
Well, I'm going to mount a spirited defense of Minnie Driver when we get there. But yeah, I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying.
I love Minnie Driver, but my feeling is just that like it doesn't lean into Slaterism enough, right? He doesn't have enough of a personality. It's kind of forgettable.
It's kind of like, if you're going to cast Christian Slater, then let him cut loose. Don't have him as an everyman. He's quirky, and at his best, it's like Heather's Very Bad Things, True Romance, like a really specific character that's maybe a little odd, he's like really good looking, but is kind of a weirdo. Like, I think that's when he's like best cast. I think
I do find him kind of watchable in like oh shit moments, like when he's just scrambling to do something, whether it's that scene where the cell is filling up or whatever. He's
He's got good physical presence, I would say.
Such a backhanded compliment. But yeah, it's like I just find him watchable in those kind of scenarios, and not everybody holds up in that kind of a moment.
You know, again, like to come back to it, one of the things that, you know, Speed, the sort of movie that we've talked about first, is like you can see the problems. Keanu Reeves solves problems really well in movies. Like he looks good solving problems. He has this intelligence. And it's not that Christian Slater doesn't, but he's written into these roles to always be back-footed. He's back-footed in Broken Arrow. He's back-footed in Hard Rain, where he doesn't expect these things to happen. And he's really good at kind of reacting in the moment and that kind of thing. But like the character just isn't fleshed out or deep enough.
Well, they're both the problem again, and this brings us into our section of the villain. I think that the balance from, you know, Broken Arrow is a somewhat divisive film. I love it, absolutely unapologetically. I absolutely love it, and I think one of the reasons is you have whether it works for you or not, John Travolta is sheer like going for it performance means that Christian Slater can be a bit more subdued in this film, to use the parlance of our times. In this film, they're both low key. The villain and the hero are low key in a low key setting with a low key premise. So I think that's sort of part of the problem. Let's talk about the villain Morgan Freeman as Jim, who also has no surname. Can Morgan Freeman as a villain ever work? Has it ever?
Well, he's not even really the villain ultimately, is he?
Well, until halfway through, right? Like
They pull the punch on it for sure.
Yeah. Can that work? Has that worked? I can't think.
Where else has he been a villain?
The only other one I could think of that was also a
Shawshank
flop was Dreamcatcher. The Stephen King
bad movie too.
I've never seen Dreamcatcher.
Oh boy,
it's horrible.
Yeah, it's a mess.
I mean, like I said at the beginning, that's the reason I didn't really care about seeing this film.
That says a lot to me.
There was something about the vibe. Like, I don't know if it felt strained for him to be in this role, because obviously the trailers didn't indicate that. I don't remember anyway, it indicating that he would take a turn in the movie, or did it? Was it very clear he was the villain throughout the trailer?
I had no idea. I didn't even know that Randy Quaid was going to do what he did, which of course he does. But yeah.
I thought that stuff was bad, by the way, when they make their turn. And it's sort of like it could have been interesting, but it just wasn't. It kind of felt like obvious.
Well, so to that point, you know, I think we kind of all agree that maybe Freeman's miscast because he brings a gravitas. But I think one thing that sort of pulled me out of the movie is there's a scene midway through where Christian Slater's like in the jail cell, and he tells Randy Quaid what's going on, and Randy Quaid like instantly believes him. Like instantly is like, you know what? This guy's had a hard night. And I remember kind of being like, what? Like, this is a little convenient, right? And then later when there's the reveal, I was like, okay, maybe this makes more sense. But, I mean, when did you guys figure out that Randy Quaid was going to make the heel turn? Did you? I didn't.
I can't remember, because I think I remember that.
I'm gullible in movies, so it's I rarely see things coming, but when it comes, I'm just like, okay, well.
I wonder if they could have broadcasted that a little bit more. That like suddenly he's like, oh, there's money out there. Like maybe I can.
Well, on the other side of things, I think they could have made Morgan Freeman's character a little more sympathetic from the beginning, or a little more like conflicted. I mean, there's, you know, from the beginning they kill the guy, who obviously there's a turn coming regarding that as well. And so you're not really on his side for any reason.
He kills Ed Asner too, like lovable Ed
character. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Who then? Let me ask you this: Who?
My vote for Dick of the movie.
Who would you like to see? Who do you think would have been better cast in the role of Jim?
Gene Hackman. I think Gene
Hackman would have been cool.
Been great.
Honestly, I don't think it's poorly cast. I think it's poorly written.
Okay.
I think it just needed more layering of a conflicted character instead of like trying to pull a switcheroo on you. Like,
yeah.
Otherwise, just make it a villain throughout and cast like Peter Green and make it Judgment Night.
Oh, wow. You're just going, roads lead back to Judgment Night. But to that point, Kris, I think this is one of the few roles where I don't believe every word that Morgan Freeman says. When Morgan Freeman isn't on screen and he's Red in Shawshank Redemption, like, he is the president in Deep Impact. Like, he's, you just believe him. He's very,
88 days underwater.
He's very believable,
he was over it.
Right? Like, and so when he's like, he just doesn't fit. And it could be a writing problem because, like, you should be able to just hand Morgan Freeman a script. He's famous for being like, I do one take.
Right.
That's why he likes working with Eastwood. He's like, I do it once, that's it. We move on. And when you're that good, maybe that's fair. But, like, with no disrespect to Morgan Freeman, because he's an amazing actor and he's an icon, he just doesn't.
He
he's not believable.
conveys nobility, I think, and dignity.
Yeah.
And as you said, the word you use, gravitas. This isn't. This character shouldn't be that. I would like to, as you know, I'd a thought on it. What I actually do like, I would have gone the other direction, have him be more of a nasty, hardcore villain, a criminal,
Yeah.
Like
for
a
the
real heel
turn to
turn.
work. Because this is and an actor I thought about for this role, and they did this very successfully in the Assault on Precinct 13 remake, which we'll eventually cover, is Lawrence Fishburne. I would love to see Lawrence Fishburne in this part. And have him be like a pretty ruthless, badass thief, but that also has a moral code. Because this is a timeless tradition in cinema where two enemies, and the original Assault on Precinct 13 Carpenter movie does this brilliantly. Two enemies are forced to join up to fight a common foe, right? That's also a classic Western theme. It's Marcellus and Butch in Pulp Fiction. It's From Dusk Till Dawn. There are many other examples. It can be so satisfying to do, and I just felt like the calibration was like slightly off to make that as satisfying. It's like either make him, as you're saying, more sympathetic or more nasty, but it's this bit sort of
he's kind of in the middle.
He's neither here
soft.
nor there. You don't know what he stands for. You don't know what his values are. He's like the nice thief. He just feels kind of wishy-washy to me.
Can I offer Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, I wonder how much it shifted as, late in the game, too, because as I understand it, they went back and filmed him even surviving.
Oh, that's right.
Because audiences didn't like the fact that Morgan Freeman died. So
that was
it kind of makes you wonder
tough.
how much the script was in progress.
Offer one more? I wouldn't have to talk about it. Another potential recasting I just thought about because I've been making my way slowly through Gone in 60 Seconds is Robert Duvall in this role. Could be an interesting one, but anyway, moving on.
Wayne
from there.
Duvall is in it, so there's a connection.
Shelley Duvall.
Shelley Duvall as the lady.
I love that.
Do you have any additional thoughts on the real villain of the piece, Randy Quaid, as the corrupt sheriff Mike Colleague, before we move on? Because I actually think he's really good in this, and I love the stuff that Randy Quaid was doing around this time, like Days of
He's
Thunder.
always good with being a circumstantial piece of shit,
well said.
just really just like. Where it just oozes from his pores, and
that is really,
and it's
well
almost
said.
like to the point that you're just come away with like, why would this guy be anything but this much of an asshole? He's really good at that kind of stuff for sure.
Yeah, I think he works really well. I think he's always fun to watch as well.
He has a great line. I forget what it is, but it's something about not eating shit anymore.
That's
it'll come up
it's coming
later.
up in the Oscars.
Cool.
Let's talk about the lady of this piece, because I actually think this to me was, I had quite a lot of thoughts about this. Minnie Driver as Karen, her character is a church restorer. This is the Yost archetype, though, right? Like it's in all three of these of his like mini trilogy. Speed, it's Keanu and Sandra Bullock. Broken Arrow, it's Christian Slater and Samantha Mathis. And here it's Christian Slater and Minnie Driver. It's like two joining forces to solve the problems. Just you guys, I actually really enjoyed her performance, and maybe just because I have so much goodwill, no pun intended, towards Minnie. Genuinely wasn't a pun.
No one would have accused you of making a pun just then.
I really do. I have so much like positivity towards her that I don't know. I'm like, but it didn't work for you guys, huh?
No,
I just don't think the role is interesting. I don't think it's good on the page. She's fine.
Yeah,
as performing it, but
it's entirely a writing problem. It never comes alive for me. And no disrespect to Minnie Driver, because I love her. I love Good Will Hunting. I love it. I think it's great.
I mean, that scene, just to touch on that for a sec, the scene, I think they're in the corridor outside of his apartment with Matt Damon. And, he's saying, you don't want to hear this about my childhood. You don't want to hear that I was burnt with cigarettes. I could just choke up thinking about that. The acting from both of them in that scene. That's some of the most heartbreaking, raw, authentic acting you will ever see on screen. And she was nominated for an Oscar for that. So she's also a bit of a kind of a low key icon in the UK. Did a lot of great comedy stuff. She was in Knowing Me, Knowing You with Alan Partridge before she got launched into like these iconic movies like Grosse Pointe Blank.
Okay, let's hear your Phantom of the Opera take. Keep going.
Yeah, did some interesting research about that. And she was just in that little part in The Beekeeper, and I just find her always so enjoyable on screen. She's so sparky. She's just very sparky.
But she's not in this.
Grosse Pointe Blank.
Grosse Pointe Blank, amazing.
But she's not sparky in this. I just feel like the role is not there. And like the way it ends with him being like, sorry about the church, and it's basically like, brr, brr, brr. Like
freeze
it just
frame.
Doesn't.
My God.
It's
I'm all for a freeze frame end.
Horrible ending. Yeah, you love.
I'm all for an earned freeze frame ending.
You love your Truffauts.
Quick
and
question.
Your Mikhail Solomons.
Yeah, best freeze frame endings. It's got to be Uncle Buck.
Best freeze frame ending. Whoa.
It's not Breathless. Good Lord. It's.
How many Rocky movies end with a freeze frame?
Many.
It's got to be
definitely
the first Rocky, right?
Yeah, I know 4 does. That's the one I tend to rewatch.
Of course.
Let's talk about that. Well, just flip these things around. Let's talk about the humor for a second, because there are
400 blows. Sorry, 400 blows is the great freeze frame.
Oh, that's
anyway.
Were there any
most important one?
Because there's quite a lot of humor in this film from one. Speaking of icons, one in particular, Betty White in this film. There's quite a lot of funny stuff in it. Was there any bits that you really liked?
Can I say something that doesn't look good in 2024? Even if it's not intended, is an old white lady in the middle of a flood calling a black man a scumbag and a lowlife. Like, it just doesn't
and setting
play
traps
that well
in their house.
Like, it's real. Like, you're like, oh, and I know that's not like, look, it's not like it, but it just
robbing the joy of Betty White. How dare you?
It took me out of it. I spent 3 minutes being like, is Betty White in this movie? It's very random.
Weird, huh? Weird.
Yeah.
That whole bit where they kind of come to the fore is where I start fading.
Yeah,
movie,
it's really tangential.
They can't quite. And it does sort of speak to the difficulty to get the tonal balance right. Like there's so many other. It's like pick a lane. Is it the Western? Is it a hard edged Coen Brothers crime movie, or is it the more absurdist? Is it the Raising Arizona Coen Brothers? Or those like heist comedies that Sam Rockwell was in the late 80s or late 90s, or is it just broad comedy? Like it's sort of a bit all over the map, trying to kind of define itself. I actually did, even though I know it's terrible. I actually really like the ending with the freeze frame. There's something to be said, as kind of bad as it is. There's something to be said for leaving the audience the last moment like a chuckle and a smile. I actually found that quite an amusing moment, and I did like the line that led up to it.
This might be your worst take. I think
I've got some shockers, but I enjoyed it. I'm easily pleased. I do. If I think of a freeze frame ending, I think of John Candy smiling in a moment that makes you both laugh and feel the warm and fuzzy. So I'm all for a freeze frame ending. The action of this movie, our last category. Anything memorable or set pieces, moments that
just
you
the
liked?
Jet ski high school chase works well for me. Besides that, I don't know. It really
memorable,
gets messy.
Is it? Yeah.
No.
Okay. Anything?
Chris?
Chris. Yeah.
I'll just say. An unsung hero maybe of the movie is John Fraser, special effects coordinator of Speed. And to figure out how to do some of the stuff they do, especially in the first half, that was why I found the first half so engaging. I was just like, this is hard as hell what they're doing, and it's kind of fascinating to watch it happen. There's a couple of moments visual effects wise, CGI, like that fire on that church is obviously like a bad digital effect, for instance, where they keep zipping by the church on the boat and there's like a fire.
Yeah.
That stuff's no good, but just the special effects, the practical applications, all of that stuff is so good. So,
and a killer opening shot. That you'd reference as well, Liam.
I really like the long take at the beginning. Yeah,
that's wild.
Stitched together, but it's amazing.
I don't know. Yeah, that's back when it's like, how did you do that?
Yeah, no, it
today
works.
that
It's
just
really
good.
It sets a great tone for the movie.
Impressive
And then you don't get
stage
any backstory on the characters really, so it's like interesting that's how they choose to set it up. It's also chilling now.
It's not arbitrary either. It sets the geography.
You know who would have made the best fucking version of this movie is Walter Hill. That would have fucking slapped.
That would have been good.
Powers Booth as Jim. Or James Remar, someone like that. That's just like a real badass. and like
John Voight as Christian Slater.
I mean, there's so many, like Mickey Rourke would have been great in as Jim. Imagine how much you just needed more. I don't know. It needed more.
I'm talking
more
about the version made in like 1982 as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, my
we're
brain is
entering
permanently stuck there.
There's a little more like appealing to younger people that this movie might be trying to do as the genre kind of like ages down a little bit. I mean, this is an R-rated movie, but you can make a couple changes and it could be PG-13.
Yeah, it's a little soft in that regard. Let's put on our wetsuits and a la Harry Tasker. Have a tuxedo ready to go on top of it as we go to the Die Hard Oscars, aka the Action Movie Awards. Let's start. You guys all know the deal by now. The John McClane Yippee-Ki-Yay Award for Best Line actually had a few zingers.
Let's hear him.
You so much as breathe funny, your head goes back out that window without you, said by Betty White. Now that you've put your take on that, I now feel that was funny, and now I'm just disturbed by it.
Not Betty White. It just wouldn't fly now. That's the only thing
I feel terrible for writing that down because I hadn't thought of it through that lens. And then this line, which also now this seems terrible as well. When her long-suffering husband Henry, played by Richard Dysart, says to her, "You want us to get out of here? Then shut the fuck up."
Yeah. It's tough. It's
domestic abuse.
It's just tough.
Yeah. This is the line you were talking about with Randy Quaid.
Yeah, this is the winner for me already.
For 20 years, I've been eating shit, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So now I'm changing the menu. From here on out, everything I eat is going to be shit-free. I thought that would be great if you stopped saying,
Terrible.
you stopped at, so now I'm changing the menu. It's like it didn't need that extra line makes it like 40% worse.
I agree. Yeah.
Sometimes it's best to just leave it.
But Quaid delivers that line well.
Yeah,
that's
it's
what I'll say.
It's a fun moment for the character. But the other one that I had that I did find amusing, and this is why I liked the freeze frame, is because this was like the track that laid up to it. When Karen asks Tom about the state of the church she's been restoring, and he says, "I'll give you the good news. The water from the dam probably put the fire out." I thought that tickled me. I thought that was funny. My bar was pretty low.
This takes place in where does this take place? Indiana.
Yeah.
Are there like churches being?
It takes place in the actual town they shot it in.
Does it really?
Call it out the whole time.
Do churches? Are there churches old enough to be restored there? I don't know. I have a lot of questions about this.
A lot of questions that no one is interested in.
Eddie Izzard beat.
Like, what are we talking about? Anyway. Like a 50-year-old church.
Additions for good line?
I liked the one where the guy is putting the bomb on the thing and he says, "Did you teach your students how to make things like this?"
Yes.
And he says, "Have you been to high school recently? My students taught me how to make stuff
Bit
like
of 187 action in there.
Yeah.
That's a good line. That's a good
good
line. I do like that line. That guy's great.
Okay. The Hans Gruber Exceptional Thief Award for stealing the film. I've got 3 nominees. Minnie Driver as Karen, Ed Asner as Charlie, Betty White as Doreen. Addition,
Betty.
yeah. I mean, she steals everything that she's in, regardless of how her character may not play that well.
I like Asner.
He's
and
great.
I can't. Yeah, that Betty White character makes me crazy. Anyways, but yes,
We're not even talking about the fact that it comes out that he was in on it,
right?
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, like.
I like that he was in on it. I think that's a good choice.
Well, it just sort of makes the entire opening sequence ridiculous.
That's true.
Like,
yeah. Well, he does sort of express like this is a bullshit job. You know.
I know, but I'm just like, how do you get shot in your own fucking thing?
Yeah, I guess.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just
that
it even unfolded that way.
Well, this is
bizarre.
another one of my questions. I forget the name of the character's called Kenny. Why is it in movies that every single heist crew, including the greatest heist film of all time and the most researched and accurate of all time, Heat, always have a fuck up on the crew? Without fail, there's always some trigger-happy, fucking unprofessional
because
idiot.
there's this thing called drama.
Yeah, man, that's like
that
literally
is necessary.
conflict. Why is Oedipus's mom his wife? What are we talking about here?
Well, that took a turn. Let's move on to the Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the Movie. I've got 3 nominees. Randy Quaid as Sheriff Mike Collig, Wayne Duvall as Hank, the guy who works at the dam and ends up pretty quickly deciding he wants to... Well, he was sort of coerced into it, isn't he? Getting involved in the robbery. And then Mark Rolston as Wayne.
Who tries to rape Minnie Driver? Yeah, it's that guy.
Tough stuff.
It's hard not to say that guy. I would want to say the damn guy, but my pick is Ed Asner for just setting the whole thing in motion.
Yeah, that's
I
true.
like that pick.
And then getting shot like an idiot.
That's a good pick. Fucking idiot.
All right. I don't know if Marco is in the house. I don't know how you're feeling.
No more table! Next time you have a chance to kill someone, don't hesitate. Dropping a little Christian Slater in there at the end.
Is that what that was? Okay. Keep it fresh.
Way more excited than he was for Speed 2.
Why don't you go talk about your freeze frames, okay, man?
Wow.
Yeah.
This actually had some good deaths, I will say. I've got four. The aforementioned inept thief Kenny being electrocuted by the transformer. Karen stabbing Wayne with a Swiss Army knife. This film is like Swiss Army knife propaganda. That Swiss Army knife can do anything.
Big Swiss Army funded this movie.
Yeah. Hank being blown up by a propane tank.
I'm sorry, it's branded content for Swiss Armies.
It's all
I can't
about
just
branding.
stop. Okay, yeah.
The sheriff, Randy Quaid, being killed by a combination of errant speedboat motor and then being shot to death simultaneously by Tom and
That was the
Jim.
worst one.
Thoughts, moans, groans, worries, concerns, additions?
It's the guy getting electrocuted to lit on fire. I thought that was good. Glenn?
Kenny.
I would go with that one, too.
Kenny.
I wouldn't have even nominated Randy. I mean...
It's weird.
I burst out laughing when he died.
Gets
and
messy.
got hit by the engine or whatever. If we had seen the propeller go to his face or something, different story. But,
yeah, they sort of again, they kind of pull the punch. The whole movie feels a bit like a pulled punch in some respects because it doesn't, that you're like, oh shit, he's going to get a really nasty comeuppance, and then he sort of doesn't, and then they both shoot him. There's something cool about that, the idea of the hero and the villain in quotes teaming up to shoot the real bad guy. But again, it all just feels a little bit unsatisfying ultimately.
yeah.
Okay, let's move on to our final section of the show, the Double Jeopardy trivia quiz, where the scores could really change after this quick break. And we're back with our final section of the show, the Double Jeopardy trivia quiz. 3 quiz questions for you gentlemen. Collaboration is mandatory. You get 1 clue per question. You know the deal.
Why is collaboration mandatory?
Because
Posy vibes, Chris.
Yeah, posy vibes.
Okay.
We don't. Some people get uncomfortable with the competition. You know, we're
such
all
a fierce
about
competitor.
Some people
about
being
positive
Liam.
vibes.
I'm very.
All
let's go.
right, let's go. One of them I had to change because of something that came up, so just bear with me a second. Okay, question number 1. Hard Rain cast members Christian Slater and Morgan Freeman previously appeared together in which medieval adventure film?
Oh, In the Name of the Rose. No? Oh, yeah, no.
I don't know that
Medieval
Morgan
adventure
Freeman is
film.
in
No,
that.
I don't know
Morgan
why.
Freeman.
Yeah, I think because we came up
Obviously
earlier.
It's interesting that you...
Oh, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Is correct. Is correct.
That movie. It's Die Hard in Nottingham. Missed opportunity.
To the
with it.
trees.
Yeah, that movie rocks.
I had to get rid of one of the questions, so this one is a little bit similar. This is my backup piece. Hard Rain cast member and returning Die Hard on a Blank all-star Mark Rolston previously appeared in another iconic film about criminals that also starred Morgan Freeman. What was it?
Shawshank Redemption.
Is
Yeah,
correct.
Shawshank. Yeah. Is
Yeah.
he? But he's not Boggs, is he?
No, he's the guy, the
Sisters, is it they call it? Like
Yeah.
Rapist.
He's fucking
weirdly,
great.
yes, has the
Shit.
same
Yeah.
Great actor.
proclivities in both films. All right, okay, moving on to our final question from Convoluted Corner. I found this pretty interesting. As well as being a highly successful actress, Minnie Driver is also a singer of some note. She has released several albums and has supported the Finn brothers on tour. But in which previous Die Hard on a Blank film, which we covered on this show, does Minnie Driver make a brief appearance as a comically bad nightclub singer?
Nightclub singer?
There is a clue available, if you like.
I'll need a clue.
Robbie Coltrane features in the same scene, playing a Russian gangster.
Oh, was that Bond movie? Goldeneye?
GoldenEye is correct. She plays the character of Irina. If you may remember, she's doing a pretty terrible version of Stand By Your Man.
It was the hint that got me there. I didn't remember that at all.
So yeah, that's it. That's our show for this week. Chris, what have you got going on at the moment?
Just go check out 50 miles per hour. It's sitting there. 50 episodes about speed. Always looking for new listeners.
We got to get you back in the future for your 4th appearance, just to keep ahead of everybody else. All the other folks.
need some more Graham Yost movies. Next time on the show, we may have some Christmas gifts coming up for you, TBC. As far as for the next movie that we're doing, it will be a continue of our jet ski laden aquatic adventures with Deep Rising. We're still working on the tagline. Die Hard in a sea monster movie, potentially. You know, we'll to be confirmed. Please rate, review, subscribe. Thank you to Tyson Hubley, for doing all our wonderful artwork and social media assistance and so forth. Liam, any final words?
We'll be back next time with a tagline that we haven't figured out yet. Die Hard on a Blank is a podcast created and hosted by Philip Gawthorne. Liam Billingham co-hosts and produces the show. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at DieHardOAB. Rate, review, follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, tell your movie podcast-loving friends about Die Hard on a Blank. See you next time on Die Hard on a Blank.